jobs, and growth are at stake.
That is Ronald Reagan telling Americans that tariffs have an adverse impact on jobs. More or less. But why would a Canadian province spend $75 million to borrow Reagan's voice and pick a fight with tariffs, and by extension of that, with Trump's policy agenda? This one is more than just an ad. It's actually a game theory move, a costly signal aimed at conservatives using the strongest focal point in their canon: Reagan on free trade. It's a high dollar credibility burn designed to be too loud to ignore, too familiar to dismiss, and too controversial to suppress without making it bigger via something called as a Streisand effect. And when Trump raged, the attention spiked, negotiations wobbled, and the question changed from who's right to who flinches, which is exactly how something called as audience costs get used. More of that in a moment. So you probably know what happened. Ontario launched a $75 million spend on a 1-minute anti-tariff ad in the US using clips of Reagan's 1987 address. They got wide placement in major markets, and spots included the first two games of the World Series, immediately putting the message in front of the broadest possible American audience. The Reagan Foundation objected. Trump blasted the ad as fake and halted trade talks. Ford later touted more than 1 billion impressions and called it the most successful ad. A data point that illustrates how outrage can multiply distribution beyond the paid flight if the controversy catches fire. And that is the difference between cheap talk and something called as a costly signal. Cheap talk is costless persuasion anyone can utter. Costly signaling, on the other hand, burns resources to prove resolve and quality, especially to a skeptical audience. Writing a tweet about free trade is cheap talk. Spending $75 million to put Reagan's anti-tariff words into primetime American eyeballs is the costly signal that says we're serious and we expect you to take this seriously as well. And the choice of messenger here is not random. Ronald Reagan functions as a Schelling focus point for Republicans, the default coordinate in the conservative mind when coalition needs a shared definition of our side's values under pressure. By invoking Reagan, the ad tries to coordinate attention and norm setting within the GOP, implying that the tariffs aren't aligned with conservative values. And you know that because Reagan told you why they backfire and not because a Canadian premier did. And by doing all of this, Ontario places 3 very carefully selected traps. Trap 1 is the Streisand effect. Attempts to suppress or delegitimize a message can make it bigger, which is why presidential denunciations often function like free amplification for the target. When Trump called it fake and cut off talks, coverage exploded and reach estimates ballooned, which is exactly what happens when a message becomes forbidden fruit for half of the country and must-see content for the other half. Trap 2 is audience costs. Once you escalate publicly, backing down is costly because your audience judges you for bluffing or losing. So the player who flinches first pays with credibility at home. Pausing the ad after the first 2 World Series games can look like de-escalation unless it's framed as leverage that extracted some kind of a concession or created meaningful impact. Trap number 3 is legitimacy. The quickest way to kill a message is to call it fake, but if the words are Reagan's and the sourcing is from a public domain, the fake label backfires and drags the conversation back to substance, which is tariffs and jobs. We spoke about costly signals earlier, and here's something interesting which is not evident immediately every time. Costly signals are expensive by design. The price is the point, because only a committed player can afford to buy them at scale, which is why a $75 million media burn reads as a credible point to decision makers inside Republican districts. But interestingly, while they're called signals, they're often deployed as costly gambles. You place the ad in moments of intense attention, like the World Series, because the payoff distribution is spiky and a burst of controversy can deliver reach far beyond the paid budget. That stochastic burst is exactly what the Streisand effect predicts when influential figures try to swat something off the timeline only to send it to orbit by making it taboo, dangerous, or both. I find this ad very interesting because, sure, Ontario wants to soften the tariff zeal inside Republican constituencies and drive a wedge between Reaganites and tariff nationalists so that the policy temperature drops before it hardens into a negotiation posture. But then I was like, there's got to be more to it. And what does the sponsor of this ad, Doug Ford, want? I think he wants to be seen as the guy who went on the offensive for Ontario workers and manufacturers, forced the debate onto conservative ground, and didn't blink when Washington snarled back. That's why the audience costs frame matters. If you surge and then retreat, your people punish you. But if you surge, trigger a national conversation, and then pivot to mission accomplished, debate restored to Reagan, you can claim the win even if tariffs persist. And from that perspective, Ford would probably take this as a win because while some may say he was out of place to do this, perceptually he appeared strong to his audience base and people will remember him for this moment for the rest of his political career. At the end of the day, this $75 million campaign will have one of three outcomes. If Republicans recalibrate towards Reagan's language on tariffs and even marginally, the coalition's internal referees start throwing flags on tariff maximalism, and the negotiation frontier shifts towards carve-outs and lower ceilings. And even when Kuzma is renegotiated in 2026, I think it'll bode well for them. Now, if denunciations continue, reach continues, and earned media compounds, and in that branch, the ad buys earned attention for the price of 1 week, and Ford gets to say he made the case to Americans using their own hero. If the whole thing backfires, it will be because audience costs kicked in at home and the pause looked like Ford blinked. But he is smart enough to have deployed the fix promptly by framing it as a mission achieved pause and not as a retreat under fire. Interestingly enough again, and this is where I think Ontario did well. If you want Republicans to listen, you don't hire a Brooklyn ad shop to lecture economics. You borrow Reagan, buy the biggest stage in America, and force a choice between their icon and their tariff reflex. Calling it fake didn't make it disappear. It made it enormous because in 2025, outrage is the distribution network and censors are the marketing team, which everyone tends to pretend to forget. If Ford blinks, he pays. If Trump rages, the message grows. And that's how audience costs and the Streisand effect twist the board. So the loudest denouncement becomes the loudest megaphone. The only real question is whether Reagan still coordinates the right. And if the answer is yes, then this wasn't an ad. It was a reminder, a focal point, and a dare all at once. And if you think $75 million is too much to pay for this reminder, you're missing the point of costly signaling. The price is the proof that you mean it. Everyone says Ontario bought ad spots. I disagree. It bought a very important conversation. And it did so on conservative terms and intentionally or unwittingly dared Washington to make it bigger, which is a lot of things, but cheap talk ain't one of them.